very honored and happy to be here, to be invited to share my ideas here with you. But just to start, I would like to ask you a favor in respect to all very important people who are here. I would like that we all stand to give another very big round of applause to my colleague, Chandra, for the great work he has done. Okay, thank you. I have been Chandra colleague for some years. We met more than 10 years ago for the first time, and it has been really good. And I'm grateful to maintain this friendship and collegiality with Chandra. So this is the topic of my talk today, and well, you managed to be so quick. I will do my best not to talk for more than half an hour. This is the topic of my presentation, and I have to say that I was inspired by a topic presented by an African philosopher at my university. He is from Guinea-Bissau, and his talk was, what if Africa didn't exist? And he had many arguments, very good arguments. I loved his presentation. And, you know, at the bottom he was trying to say that in Africa, we are always left for the last place. But if we didn't exist, that would make a huge difference to the world. So they shouldn't ignore Africa. That was more or less what he was trying to say. So I said, you know, yeah, we do exist, and we cannot think about Africa not existing. Can you think about that? No. So instead of thinking of her as not existing, I say, what about if we don't embark with them? And this is the topic of my presentation today. You know, I did this in my Mac, and sometimes when you transfer to HP, it doesn't work. Okay, so which one do I want to use? When I was a young girl, my mother was still alive, and she had a sewing machine, and she would make us beautiful dresses and beautiful trousers to my brothers. But what I really like on my mother's work, it was when she would make this kind of blanket or mats, where she would join different pieces of clothes to make it a colorful piece of cloth. You know, what fascinated me was I couldn't understand what was her logic in joining those different pieces of clothes. I could try to follow, maybe it was a color game, but it wasn't. Maybe it was the size game, but it wasn't. It seems to have no logic. And more interesting would be that sometimes I would bring her some piece of clothes, and she would take it and put it in this mat. At the end, the result was really beautiful. Today, there are many people, and the bag I'm bringing today is based in the same kind of work. You know, seems to have no logic. Why did they put this yellow here and this brown here? I really don't know. But at the end, the result is beautiful and it's nice. So I use it as a metaphor of my talk here. It's just I'm joining piece of clothes. I don't know what's the logic if you ask me what's the logic. And I don't know what's happened. I cannot say from the start what will be my objective results. But, you know, I hope you can bring also some piece of clothes. And if you put it together, I'm sure at the end it will be some beautiful blanket or mat or basket or handbag. So for today, I'm bringing here 3 points. I will start as a kind of introduction to talk about industrial revolutions. Then I will talk a little bit about critical theory, which is actually my contestation. And thank you, Paul. If I knew your presentation beforehand, I would have asked you some of the slides, because they really support what I'm going to say here today. And I will end my presentation with the concept of desocialization, which is my main argument in this presentation. So moving quickly. We have heard about these industrial revolutions. The first one, which was some centuries ago, and it was due to discovery on a steam machine, and the productivity in the world increased so much, and the impact in the society we can read. The second industrial revolution was created due to the discovery of electricity. The third one was about computers and internet. And we know the impact of computers and internet in the world. And we are talking now about the fourth industrial revolution, which is also called the digital revolution, where what's biological, what's physical, what's just from cyber world is confusing. There is no strict borders. Maybe we have heard about Sophia. And some people argue that she has higher intelligence than some of human beings. I don't know if that's true, but I have heard some people saying so. So it is a time of artificial intelligence, the robotics, when they are doing, for me, they are doing really crazy things. However, in spite of all this, in spite of all these industrial revolutions, and almost 18 years after the declaration of the Millennium Development Goals, now we move to the Sustainable Development Goals, 70 years after the declaration of the universal human rights, like no discrimination, everyone has the right to have rights, inclusive the right to scientific life. In spite of all this, knowledge production shows divide between North and the South. Benefits from knowledge is not the same if we look around the world. And impact of this technology which we are talking about is not the same if you look at some countries in the South and other countries in the North. I can even give you some examples. If we talk about mobile phones and internet, which were the great achievement for the third industrial revolution, this is the situation in Africa, where South Africa is the country where around 90% of people own a mobile phone. But if you go to other countries like Ethiopia, you will see that less than 20% of people are owning mobile phones. Looking at the access of internet those people with mobile phone have, we see that those numbers drops. Like in South Africa, about 50% have mobile phones accessing internet, but you can have countries like Ethiopia when less than 10% of people are accessing internet. If we think further back, relating to the second industrial revolution, where electricity was the major factor, today we still have many countries in South Africa, many houses in Mozambique or South Africa and other countries where they have no electricity. The average is like less than 50% of houses in Africa have access to electricity. And the highest again, of course, South Africa. And this situation is not only in Africa, like you have this divide. We are talking about the fourth digital revolution, but you go back to the second with electricity, we are still far behind. This situation is not only in Africa. In some countries in Asia, like in Timor-Leste, the report from UNESCO 2016 shows us that less than 28% in Timor-Leste have access to internet. So it begs me to ask really, when we are talking about industrial revolution, who is in those revolutions? In which ways are we in those revolutions. And that takes me to my second point in this presentation, which is to think about critical theory. And I used to think critical theory is the most important thing to analyze everything which is happening around me and around my country. Critical theory meanings, in short, we question with interest, we question those things we are taking for granted. And it is said that critical theory can take as a step towards emancipation, which should be the aim if you are thinking about human rights for everyone. But there are some concerns about critical theory, and I'm not the first one to raise this kind of concerns. At the very basic level, there are many authors claiming that for you to master well critical theory, you have to know a bunch of new words. I remember when I was at the university with Peter, I struggled to understand the meaning of hegemony. I really struggled to understand that. And there were many, many other words, including emancipation. There were many words I had to struggle with. Even if I would try to translate to Portuguese, I learned to read and write in Portuguese, not in English. But even if I would try to translate it in Portuguese, I would still struggle. So the tricky thing for me was also that I had to learn these new words to things I already knew. It's just that I didn't have that specific word. I didn't have the word hegemony. And thinking of our presentation, we can see that there are many concepts which we had from different philosophies, but we didn't have the same word as in English. And they come as a new thing for us. But at the same time, it's very important to learn these words, because you cannot write, you cannot present your papers if you don't master this kind of words. So this remember me of Steve Biko. Have you heard of Steve Biko? He was a South African apartheid fighter. I love Steve Biko, and I think his writings never get outdated. My colleagues from South Africa can tell. And he has a book, I Write What I Like. I would recommend everyone to read that book. Never gets outdated. And he said, you think in terms of language and this struggle of understanding language, you tend to think it's not just a matter of language. You tend to tie it up also with intelligence. So critical theory, which is critical for us, brings at the end of the day some of divide between those who can master all those terms and those who cannot master all those terms. So this is one of the critiques I would make to critical theory. We have other critics at different levels, maybe higher levels. There are some authors arguing about the inconsistencies between theory and practice, even when it's come to critical theory. Anyway, a theory is a theory, and that was a good question someone posed here in terms how do you translate it to community? Because a theory is a theory. And critical theory, of course, brings all its risks. Taylor referred to some of them. You may become arrogant, you may become narcissist, just by being critical, working in a critical paradigm. Okay. One of the last news and a critical theory is the post-humanism thing. And some authors say that it's trying to update critical theory. Post-humanism in terms of we have to think behind humans. And I thank everyone who spoke here before me, because we are all in the same idea that human beings are not the central. We cannot be anthropocentric. We have to value all other elements of this earth. And my point is, critical theory, even with this post-humanist thing, is willing to give, to help, to open our eyes. But it's not prepared to receive, to learn. And that's why even post-humanism, well said by Ball, exists in other theories. But with critical theory, we are not open enough to receive. We are there to help people to understand the problems and not to learn. We are not much with critical theory in a sense of caring, of being connected. If you care, you feel and you express that other people, other elements of the herd are also equally important. So for, oops, this is jumping because I work with Mac. Okay, so for Parvati Raghuram, care is at the heart of debates of how we change society. Let's imagine if we all care, if we are all ready to give and to receive. In that situation, I think most of the problems we have in our world won't exist. Because instead of just reproducing a kind of society, we would be reconstructing that society. Because I would have to give, but I would also have to receive. I can give you one example what I mean by giving and receiving. When we talk about knowledge production, this is a map which exists for some years now, but it's still valid. When you talk about knowledge production, you may be familiar with this. This is the world, and we see which parts of the world are producing more knowledge. You look at Africa, and I'm talking, my point of view is Africa. You see the amount of knowledge Africa is producing. We almost don't exist, as my colleague was suggesting. What if Africa didn't exist? So if you look at knowledge production in the world, you will say that, oh, Africa almost doesn't exist. But if you had different equations, if we had an ethic of care, instead of just looking at the map, we would wonder, we would be curious about what's happening in those blank spaces. Is it that they are not producing any kind of knowledge? Or maybe they are producing a different kind of knowledge with different kind of validity. Maybe we should go to those blank spaces and think, what can we learn from them? Instead of what can we give? And most of the discourse, academic discourse, economic discourse towards Africa is what can we give them to help them? Because they are suffering. Look, they don't even have knowledge production. They never ask, what can we learn in terms of knowledge, in terms of different epistemology? What can we learn and what can we innovate in our way of producing knowledge? And as evidence, you see that there are many authors arguing that, there are many indigenous knowledge, many indigenous people doing a lot of work, even for curriculum studies, but most of the time they ignore it. Because the world is not expecting to learn something. And many of these studies, they're actually done under the lens of the critical theory. So we use critical theory to discover that, there are other kinds of knowledge, but not really for us to learn. We're just having some documentations and nothing more than that. So we'll quickly go to some of examples I would like to share with you. I was in a project with South Africa, which aimed to document all the research done in Mozambique and South Africa in terms of indigenous knowledge system. So we analyzed more than 700 research papers, and we had the framework to analyze all the papers using Ogunins. Meshach Oguni was my colleague in this project. We were using Ogunin's framework for analyze. So the indicators for us to, I would say, judge the quality of discourse in all these papers, where if the discourse was assimilated, if the discourse had adopted Western indicators, if it was dominant, subordinate, equivalent, or emergent. And in my view, emergent one would be the most important in my view, because the emergent is the one which tries to give and receive in terms of connecting to Western knowledge, not only seeing IKS as the most important, indigenous discourse as the most important, there are also better things with indigenous knowledge. It's not all good. So if we are willing to receive and give, we may have an emergent, different discourse. And and IKS research is mostly illuminated by critical theory. And we found that most of the discourse were subordinated or assimilated, even using critical theory, because most of these papers were not willing to learn from indigenous perspectives. Another project, very quickly, was the fishing project. It ended some years ago, and we are publishing the book at the end of this year, hopefully. And we were visiting many fisher people in Mozambique and learned from them the knowledge, the indigenous knowledge they had for the fishing activity they were involved in. Myself, I learned a lot about how they predict the weather, about how they guess if the day will be good in terms of fishing, about, so many issues. How do you behave before you go fishing? I learned so many issues. But when it came to include these issues in our curriculum, it was always a challenge, because the formatting is not appropriate to bring different kinds of epistemologies in our curriculum. And you may struggle, you may fight, you may force, but people will not understand. And some of the issues will not make sense in our books, etc. So the point, and I'm really scared of speaking loud, because I think we are all into critical theory here. But I think critical theory is loaded in its own context. It misses the ethic of care. It's prepared to give, not much to receive. And because of that, we have this phenomenon of euphemism. Critical theory seems to bring new concepts to us, but those concepts we knew from long ago. But they just come in a different word, a beautiful word. And I could give you many examples, Val gave many examples comparing to the chakra philosophy. But when it comes under the Western discourse, it's something new. Even in terms of connecting this post-humanism, we are saying, in Africa, many kids will learn from a young age to be connected to nature. And this picture here, I think, can illustrate it very well. It's a kind of, you share harmony, synergies between people, but also with the environment. I'm not sure if you can see the deep meaning of this picture here. It's really a kind of connected learning. So, again, if you talk about posthumanism, there's an author who says that posthumanism may foster stronger connections with indigenous research because they overlap. And finally, she says, posthumanism might, starting to think, might turn into indigenous research to learn from critical place inquiries. It's a possibility, a remote possibility, that it might turn to indigenous knowledge. And that's why I say critical theory, even the updated one, which is the posthumanism, is not prepared to learn. They finally say they might learn. So this brings me to my last point today, which this term, dissocialization, is a term I actually borrowed from Ira Shore. I loved her book. It's about empowering education. And she thinks that, no one chooses to be in the margins in this society. No one chooses to be a low-class kind of citizen. But the kind of social reproduction, she says, socialization we are involved in, create this kind of, upper class, medium class, and the lower class kind of people. And it's not only about economics. I can tell you in Mozambique, the majority of people in Mozambique are black, like me. But it's so difficult to get a black doll. I have a granddaughter, and I like to buy her toys. It's difficult in Mozambique to buy a black doll. They are all white, blonde, and usually, you know, that appearance. I wanted to buy her some school bags. It's so difficult to get school bags with pictures of Africans in there. All the beautiful school bags, they have this type of designs you can see there. You know, it's absurd, I would say, but beyond what's beautiful is linked to race from this perspective. And this is a kind of socialization. You see, if I bring this back, I'm not sure if you can see it closer. There is one person there who looks like black, but he is the ugly one, the bad one. Can you see that? And from young age, we are grow up in this kind of socialization. And you learn that to be good, to be beautiful, you have to have a light skin. You cannot be black. You know, blacks are ugly. These are the bad guys in the story. So this is just a little examples, because it's not only about curriculum. When we talk about socialization, it's a bigger dimension, it's a social dimension. It's not only the content, it's everything about, you know, about our life. And lastly, last times I used to say that, you know, to have a good curriculum, the curriculum should include everything. Everything should be part of the curriculum. The school bags, the dolls, the trees we are planting, how we paint our school, the architecture, everything should be part of the curriculum so that we could think about the socialization. All these things take us to one way of socialization, one way of dividing, you know, some kind of people and other type of people. So this socialization, the word which Ira Shaw is using, means not only to question existing knowledge, but to acknowledge that, you know, curriculum and political are all process of inclusion and exclusion. So this socialization, we look at how new trends, new revolution, etc., are they prepared to care? This fourth industrial revolution, are they prepared to care? So indeed, what if we do not embark? And I can, almost at the end, I can give you some examples. I could cite Kadino Shipanga, who has a hairdresser in Mozambique, and he refused to use, you know, when you go to hairdress, there are many magazines showing, you know, very important people. Of course, those good, even very important people, they are never African like me. You can learn about the Kardashian family in the United States when you go to these hairdressers. So he's choosing not to embark on that, and he has a different kind of architecture. He's learning from our own context. How can he have a beautiful hairdresser, not with those normal kind of magazine, not with that normal look? This is a kind of trying to desocialization. I can give you an example of Julius Nyerere from Tanzania, who used to talk about Ujamaa. This may be something new for you, but Ujamaa is a kind of philosophy for development he thought we could have in Africa, so that we won't embark in the kind of philosophy of development from the Western country, Ujamaa. And what if we don't embark? I would refer to many colleagues, and Bal gave us some good examples here of supervising thesis and dissertation, which do not follow the path to produce just an academic paper. Rather, they develop a new path. They're learning from other epistemology, for chakra epistemology, philosophy, for example, and thus they have innovative methodology. I would refer to Ndokodo, which is a kind of dance and sing. For the first one, I think it wasn't a question, it was more a comment, and I would like you to give a whole speech, because you align with my way of thinking, and I would say the same, you know, why are we, you know, following on one path? We can desocialize it. we can say, no, we are not embarking. If you don't care, we are not embarking. That's what I think. But it's up to each of us. It's, you know, it's your choice. And for me, that's my choice. And that was, that's why I read with, you know, genuine interest about Chandra's students' work, because I see most of them, they are not embarking in that one part of socialization. Thank you for the